Welcome to the WealthAbility Show, where we're always discovering how to make way more money and pay way less taxes. So we have in Congress right now the Build Back Better plan, or at least that's the title of it, given by the Democrats. This supposedly $3.5 trillion, some say it's $5 trillion bill. And the question that I have is, first of all, will it work? And second of all, why do we have it in the first place? We are really super fortunate today to have Dr. James Otteson. Jim is the author of 7 Deadly Economic Sins.
I'm at the University of Notre Dame. I teach business ethics. My training, my graduate training is actually in philosophy, not in business. I came to an appreciation and to the study of economics because I wrote my dissertation on Adam Smith's moral theory. So Adam Smith, who's often credited with being the founder of the discipline of economics, he also wrote a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. So I became very interested in his moral theory, which led me to become interested in his economics and then other economic theory that came out of the 18th century. And now I teach business ethics, where I try to apply some of a little bit more of a historical context when people are worried about contemporary issues. A lot of things that arise now are nothing new under the sun. They've arisen before.
Question I have is, will it work? Will this, I'm going to try to be completely fair here. Will this build back better? Do you think that this will work to A, stimulate the economy, and B, reallocate income?
It depends on what your definition of work is and what you think the goal of the legislation really is. One of the mistakes that I think a lot of legislation makes is that, you brought up incentives, which implies that human beings respond to incentives. But the critical piece of that is not only do they respond to incentives, but they also respond in ways that are a bit unpredictable. Human beings, for better or worse, they are unpredictable. They make choices that aren't always exactly what we would like them to make. And I think one of the mistakes that a lot of legislation makes is that human beings are relatively static. In other words, you can make some kind of change to policy or legislation and nothing else will change. And a lot of the forecasts and a lot of the cost benefit analyses that people tried to make, when they're scoring legislation, assumes that nothing will change. Everybody will engage in exactly the same behavior they were engaging in before. And so, if we raise taxes by 10%, well, we just look at whatever the pot of money was before we would increase the tax rate. We just take 10% of that and we say, oh, that's the new revenue. We're going to have 10% of that. You mentioned my book, 7 Deadly Economic Sins. So one of the sins that I talk about in that book is the idea that good is good enough. That's what I call it. It's the good is good enough fallacy. And what I mean by that is that if somebody shows or argues that there's some kind of benefit that would come about, say, from a policy change, we change this policy, here's the benefit I think we could get from it. If we have child tax credit, well, here's the number of people that would be benefited by it. That would include not only parents maybe, but also child care providers and maybe a range of other people. We point out all of that benefit. And let's suppose, just for the sake of argument, and if you'll allow me, Tom, just for the sake of argument, we'll just stipulate that all of those benefits actually would ensue, that you would really get those. Well, usually the analysis stops right there and says, well, if there's benefit, then therefore we should do it. And what I would argue is that, no, that's not good enough yet. So the fact that it would lead to some benefit is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Because what you need to show is that not only would it lead to a good benefit, but that it would be better than whatever else those resources would otherwise have been expended on. We live in a world of limited resources. So any amount of resources we put in one direction is resources we cannot put in other directions.
Okay, so why? What do you think is behind this? Is it really this purity and this ignorance of what's going on? Or is there something, there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there. People reach for these conspiracy theories. I know people that are very smart people that they're all into conspiracy theories. I'm going, okay, so they've got to be in conspiracy theories because they can't make sense of it. So can you help us make sense of why this leaning towards socialism and away from capitalism? How do you make sense of that?
First, think about younger people, so millennials and younger in the United States, so millennials down to, maybe current college students or high school students. I think for many of them, they don't really have a good definition in their minds or a good concept in their minds of what socialism or capitalism are. They don't know what they really are. So, and maybe that goes back to your point about education, but if you ask those groups of people, tell me what socialism and capitalism are, they'll say things like, well, capitalism is where everybody's out for himself and doesn't care about anybody else and is happy to stab anybody else in the back to benefit himself. That's what capitalism is. What's socialism? Socialism is where we care about people, including people who need help. Okay, well, if those are your two definitions, well, then if somebody says, which do you prefer? That seems pretty clear. But I also think that there's a little bit a slightly different way that you might be able to frame this. And I think part of the question is whether it's possible for business and business people engaged in business in a market economy or a commercial society, can business be what I would call honorable? And I'll give you one example. You've probably heard the phrase that businesses or business people should give back to society. So we hear that a lot. Well, I mean, I don't know if you've ever given any thought to that phrase, but think about what it means to say you need to give back. I mean, notice we don't say that business needs to give, but give back.
So that means that that assumes they took in the first place.
That assumes they did something wrong that they need to atone for now by giving back. Many people think that the only way you can become a Jeff Bezos or pick whoever you want as a super wealthy person, the only way that's possible is by having engaged in wrongdoing somewhere along the line. Maybe we don't know exactly what you did wrong, but we're sure you did something wrong. And that's why you need to give back. And my suggestion would be, well, is there some way we can imagine engaging in business such that it's actually valuable in itself, not just, for giving to charity afterwards or something, but the activity of business itself. And I think there clearly is, and there has to be, if we bring it back down to the level of, when you go into the store and you buy something from somebody, from the clerk, and you give the money, you give $5 to the barista gives you the coffee. Which one of you benefited from that transaction? The answer is both of you did, because if either one of you didn't benefit, you would have said no. And those kinds of transactions, and that's, by the way, reflected in the fact that you both say thank you to each other. But those kinds of transactions repeated millions and billions of times, those are the mutually beneficial, mutually voluntary and mutually beneficial transactions that incrementally raise overall levels of prosperity. So to come back to where we started, people are worried about inequality. And I think they're worried about inequality because they think that inequality arises only from injustice or from some lack of fairness somewhere along the way.
So let me go back to something you said. You said, okay, so millennials, Gen Zers, they maybe have a distorted view of what socialism and capitalism are. Okay, and that's my experience too. Okay, the education is perhaps not what I would like to see in that area, but certainly that doesn't hold true for Bernie Sanders, who is our head socialist, right? Bernie Sanders, okay, I can give AOC a pass because she's in that millennial group. That's fine. But Bernie Sanders, you can't give him a pass because he grew up in the Soviet era. He grew up where Mao Zedong was the leader of China. So he grew up among socialism, communism, socialism. So how do you, what's he after? What do you think is behind that?
It's hard for me to look into his soul and see what's going on inside it. But what I can say is I can speculate a little bit based on what I've heard from him and other people.
Just so you know, I like Bernie Sanders because I think he believes what he says.
What actually is motivating him? I think maybe a couple of things. On the one hand, I think it's there is a very strong attraction to the idea of all of us being in it together. We want to rise or fall together as a group with a kind of unity, a deep community where we take the common good seriously. And and if the community succeeds, then all of us are succeeding, as opposed to some of us more than others. And I think because of that strong attraction to this notion of a unity, we're all in this together, that looks very different from what you get under the self-interested, individualistic capitalism. Under capitalism, that looks like, well, we're really all in it for ourselves. And if you look at a commercial society, what do you see? You see lots of different people pursuing lots of different life paths, lots of different preferences they have and choices they make, but we're not all making the same choices. We're not all making the same, we don't all have the same preferences. We're not all pointing in the same direction.
So let me end with this. What are some practical things, maybe 2 or 3 practical things that people can do, given this divisiveness, given this move, half the world, half the country towards socialism, the other half rebelling against socialism? What can people actually do about it?
But one thing I would say is to begin with shared principles. So whether you want to redistribute wealth or not, I think everybody would agree that you have to have wealth in order to redistribute it. So if there isn't any wealth, then it doesn't matter what the principle of distribution is anymore, because there isn't anything to distribute. You can't divide zero. So where we should first think about is, what are the institutions that actually enable the creation of prosperity, and including the increasing creation of prosperity. And what we don't want to do, whatever our policies are, what we don't want to do is endanger that. We don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. So it's not just about who gets the egg, it's also about the goose. And we want more than one goose, we want lots of geese. And that's something that I think that can cut across political division, that yes, we do need to have increasing prosperity. And there are lots of ways to go back to your very first point. Human beings do respond to incentives. And if you punish them for creating things, or make the cost of producing or creating so great that people just say, it's not worth it. It doesn't have to be everybody all at once, but at the margins, the more and more people that you raise the cost for doing that, they're just going to shrug their shoulders and say, yeah, it's not really worth it. And we're seeing this in things like people, the decreasing workforce. Don't forget about opportunity costs. No matter what you decide to do, before you know that it's a good thing to do, you got to think about what you're giving up. Every decision has an opportunity cost.
I love that. I think everybody believes that we want people to have enough, and we want people to have a standard of living. I don't think there's any real disagreement there. So we can start there. We can build from that. I think we can get more education and really share the education, because I continue to believe this is not a wealth inequality issue. It's not an income inequality issue. It's an education inequality issue. And the more education we get, what we always end up with is way more money and way less taxes. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
You've been listening to the WealthAbility Show with Tom Wheelwright. Way more money, way less taxes. To learn more, go to wealthability.com.